Hi, I'm Jess and I'm with the Women's Rights Network. Today I'm with
Shay
and
Heather.
So today we're going to be discussing how young women can get more involved with the gender critical movement and how we can focus our campaigning towards them because they're a big part of the conversation.
Well, as someone who got an interest in this topic and developed these opinions at quite a young age, I did feel like I was probably the only person my age that felt this way, and that I was quite alone in my opinions. But through getting involved with the Women's Rights Network, I found that I'm not the only one, and I have developed a community that has supported me and made me feel like there are other women out there that do feel the same way as me. And it's given me a lot more courage to speak out and to get involved with this movement and with feminism in general. And also I've just learned so much from the older women that I have met through the Women's Rights Network. They have supported me, and it's just such a strong network of very brave women. And I think that's why it's really important for young women not to keep it silent and to think that they are the only people that feel this way, that there are other women out there. And we also have developed a network of young women within the network ourselves, under 30s group, and just so if young women maybe feel that they are maybe if they get involved, they're going to be the only ones in their 20s or maybe their late teens that are involved in the network. That's not true. There are others out there.
Yeah, so as evidenced by me and Shay, there are other women out there who are young and have these views, gender critical views. I think the current consensus with the Women's Rights Network is through the demographic of those who are like mums, I'd say, around that age, and who are probably more concerned about their children. And from our perspective, we are them children.
Yeah.
And I think especially when it comes to children or young people transitioning, there's been a massive increase of women transitioning to men, and that's different to the previous trend where it was male to female. What do you think about that, Heather?
Well, I think there's first of all, there's four things. When we talk about trans, it's a huge umbrella that covers four separate groups as I see it. There's the transsexuals, that's less than 1% of the population, and they're men. Then there's the transvestites and cross-dressers. The AGPs, they're probably possibly more of a threat, and certainly more active in terms of social media, etc. And they're men. Then you get this your age group, the young people, and transing, which is seen as a bit of a fad, possibly also a bit of a social contagion. It's the in thing. It's the very kind of, this is how my perspective on it is, this kind of trendy thing to be involved in. It's the thing of your generation. And it's much more about being kind, being fluid, dressing how you want. Unfortunately, there is also so much harm done from that, because the people that are predominantly affected in that group are women. And they are being led to believe that they can become men. Awful surgeries, they're mutilating their bodies, they're sterilising themselves. I do not believe they all know what they're embarking on when they do this. There's another group which is young children who believe what they're told, like Santa Claus exists, and they believe they can change sex. So there's kind of four key groups that fall under this big trans umbrella, and we must not get them all confused. In terms of, we're talking about the group, the sort of social trans group of young women predominantly. It breaks my heart that so many of them are embarking on this journey, which is life-changing for them. And the women in the network, the older women, the mums in the network, we're not all mums. We all have, different angles on different, whether it's maybe it's the transsexuals are the thing that bothers them most, or transvestites that bothers them most. But I think across the board, we all can see what's happening to these young women. There was more than 4,000% increase in the last 10 years of the number of girls that were referred to the GID service for advice on this. That's a huge number.
Why do you think that is?
I wish I knew the answer on why that is. I wish somebody had done some research. I wish there'd been some proper information gathered on it. I wish there were statistics that we could show. We're going to be submitting some FOIs to the NHS to try and find out how many double mastectomies have been carried out annually over the last 10 years on healthy flesh. So that's, there's not been any medical reason for it. It's been carried out on healthy flesh. And I think that needs to be, it should have been looked at. It shouldn't be left to a bunch of women of all ages to be saying something wrong is happening here. We need to understand why. I'd like to think that that group, your age group, may grow out of this as they get older, leave university or get jobs, move their lives on. As a whole, this will change in the same way that perhaps the contagions of cutting or anorexia have, although they've not gone completely, but they've certainly diminished over the years. But that's still going to take some time. And in the meantime, there are too many young women being seriously harmed. This is a very different issue to men going into women's toilets. It's the most awful thing that is happening to young women.
Yeah. Shay, from a young person's perspective, why do you think it might be that women, biological women, are considering themselves as maybe non-binary, maybe trans?
Yeah, well, over the years I have watched quite a lot of close friends of mine transition and start testosterone and get double mastectomies. When I met these women, they didn't really express to have what is called gender dysphoria. They didn't really seem to have any discomfort in their bodies, and then suddenly it was almost like it was overnight. And I do think that social media maybe had a big part to play. I do think that they maybe had other underlying mental health issues, and through social media they're told, well, this is why you feel depressed, because you're really a man inside. I also do think that the younger generations now have very conservative views about what a man is and what a woman is, and that contributes to a societal pressure for gender non-conforming people to transition. I've seen, stereotypically, more masculine women get misgendered by younger people more than older people. They're getting called, very, obviously female people, but they maybe dress more masculinely. People assume that they're trying to be a man. They're often called they, them, or he, him by younger people, more so than the older generation. And I think it's because young, teenagers and people in their 20s see gender non-conforming behaviour as a sign that person is trying to be the opposite sex. They think that's the more progressive position, and I feel like that creates a bit of a societal pressure that they think, well, everybody around me thinks that because of the way I dress, I am a man. Maybe they're right. Maybe I actually am a man. And almost every person that I've seen who is more masculine, every woman that I know that was more masculine presenting now identifies as something other than a woman. Over the last very short period of time, so about 3 years.
On that, it puzzles me. So you get to talk to Jess. So it puzzles me that I spent my life breaking down the barriers of these boxes that I was put in as a child. That that the girls like pink and dolls, and boys like football and want to be firemen. And a lot of that changed, and a lot more women went into the sciences and engineering. For instance, we do specific programs to help break down those barriers and encourage more women's involvement. And this is no reason why they shouldn't. Sex doesn't stop them doing any of those things. Buying children different coloured clothes so they weren't obviously of one sex or the other. And it astonishes me and a lot of other women in my generation that we're at a stage now where those boxes are being reintroduced. And I don't understand why there is a need now to have labels, having spent my time trying to remove labels from everything.
Well, I think that the concept that some people are non-binary means that everybody else who doesn't identify as non-binary exists within the binary, and that we adhere to sexist stereotypes. I think the concept in itself implies that if you don't identify as anything other than a woman, then you adhere to all of the gendered sexist stereotypes that come with that. And I think that we should, instead of saying that in order to break free of these stereotypes you need to identify out of being a woman.
But why have those stereotypes re-emerged? I thought we'd brought them down. I thought we were in a place where women could be what they wanted to be and do what they want to do. And why is this become a thing?
Well, I do think that they have been sold the belief that this is the progressive position. But really, I think it's the opposite of progressive. I think it's very regressive. I think that to imply that you're non-binary or you're trans because you don't adhere to sexist stereotypes means that for all the women who don't identify as out of womanhood, that we are women because we adhere to these stereotypes rather than because we are female. And I think that they have been sold this lie that is the progressive position, and that this is the next civil rights movement, and that this is and also I think that a lot of these...
If this is the next civil rights movement, what do they think they're fighting for?
I do think that a lot of these women maybe had bad experiences because of being women. Maybe they've experienced sexual abuse, or maybe they have experienced domestic violence as a result of being female. So it's quite comforting to them that they feel that they have this way of being able to identify out of that, that they think that all of it, when they hear the statistics about how many women are victims of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, they're thinking, well, if I am not a woman, if I identify as a man or non-binary, then that won't affect me. So I think it gives them that little bit of comfort, when in reality that's not the case. You can't identify, these things still apply to women who call themselves something else, because these things happen because you're female. But I think it gives them a little bit of a comfort in a way.
Well, I don't want to be crass, but none of us know how Sarah Everard was identifying on the evening that her life ended.
Of course not. And when you look back at women throughout history who have been oppressed, 100 years ago, maybe just over 100 years ago, women weren't able to vote. It's not like if they had rocked up to the voting poll and said, I identify as a man, they would have been like, okay, yeah, go ahead and vote. It's ridiculous to imply that women are oppressed because we identify as women, and it also is, and I almost feel like it's victim blaming in a way. It's almost like saying that we ask for it because we don't. If you just identified as something else, that all of this stuff that comes with being female, that it wouldn't happen to you because you could just identify as something else. And I almost find like it is. It's almost like blaming us for all of the stuff that's happened throughout history, and also just on that point, I have noticed quite a lot of people now saying that any women who push back against the sexism throughout history, that they weren't really women. Though that have you noticed this as well? No. They're now saying that, like Joan of Arc and all of any brave and inspiring women throughout history, if they were gender non-conforming or they pushed back against sexism, that they were really men. And what does that say? That any woman throughout history that achieved something is because she was really a man inside. That's ridiculous.
Well, the idea of a third gender, which leftists or those who subscribe to gender ideology, the idea of a third gender often comes from sexist or homophobic even stereotypes, like
from cultures. Like they always try and frame these cultures that had these third genders as being progressive. But when you actually look at it, most of the cultures that had preferred gender boxes were because they seen like gay men as not being men. They were homophobic cultures.
It was a way to preserve the dignity of straight men.
Yes.
But it's also like in ancient Greece, for example, there was, I can't remember which Greek woman it was, but it was a woman who could speak well in court. She could defend herself, and instead of perhaps noticing, maybe women can actually speak well in courts, they're like, that can't be a woman. She's androgynous. She's not a woman. So therefore it's preserving women in those boxes, and we can see the same thing today.
Yeah, they're looking back at history. They're picking out any woman. So some women actually did try and pretend to be men in order to be able to get an education or to be doctors in the past. They're now saying that meant that they were really trans men, when really they were just doing that because of the sexist society they lived in, and that they couldn't actually do those things unless they had pretended to be men. And I think that they are almost proving the sexists in the past right by saying, well, yeah, the reason why that woman went on to be a doctor is because she was really a man inside.
Now, that's an interesting one, because we know that the pro-trans lobby, the pro-ideology lobby, have been very dismissive of J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
And we call J.K. Rowling because that's the name she used when she tried to get her books published.
Yeah.
And she was advised to use initials or use a non-sex identifying name rather than Joanne, so she plumped for JK. But they haven't been accusing JK of being actually really trans. They would do with George Sands, who did the same, used a man's name. So they're using that argument when it suits them.
Yes.
When it works.
They use a lot of arguments when it suits them. For example, like with women's toilets, they make the argument that a trans person shouldn't have to pass in order to go into a woman's toilet. So that's fair, with that argument, you shouldn't have to look like a woman, because there are women who aren't necessarily feminine. That doesn't make them any less of a woman. So yeah, you shouldn't be judged on that basis. But at the same time, you saw that picture of J.K. Rowling and a few other critical, gender critical feminists, and they were so awful towards them. They were saying that they're secretly trans.
Pass. They don't. Yes. And it's so interesting to watch, because as someone who does put themselves out there online, these people that pretend that they're the progressive ones are the first ones to criticise me on my appearance. Awful. They're the first ones to tell me I'm not feminine enough, because that is what they see a woman to be. They tell me I don't pass. They tell me that I look like a man. They're just reinforcing the idea that to be a woman is not about. A woman is not a biological reality. It's not just being female and looking any way. It's a performance. It's a certain standard of femininity that you have to achieve. They're reinforcing this idea, and they internalize it, and they really do believe it, because they believe that if a man achieves a certain level of femininity, he is a woman, and if a woman is masculine, that she is a man. And it's just like extreme reinforcement of gender stereotypes.
There are a lot of contradictions here, aren't there? I'm keen to know from you, because I think I can imagine the difficulties that you guys face amongst your peers.
Yeah.
What has that been like for you in real life?
I've been sent death threats.
Have you?
Yeah.
From people you know?
Not from people. I've been isolated from people I know. People have called me transphobic, bigoted. They've said I want trans people to be annihilated from the earth, and that's of course not true.
Yeah.
And they just strawman our ideas. And I think the thing is, with me, and I assume with you guys, when you debate people, you try and steelman their ideas, you try and understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
They want to create the simplest idea of what we stand for. They think we just want to hate on people, and that's simply not true.
And I do think that they have vilified these views to the point where young people are even afraid to hear the alternative view. So they have to vilify us. They have to say, like, we want a whole group of society dead, which is complete rubbish. It's complete rubbish. They have to do that because they're afraid of people listening to us and realising that we actually make sense. Whereas I listen to the other side. I have friends who disagree with me. I debate people. I watch documentaries. I listen to the other side. They just won't listen to us because they know that we make sense, and they try and put people off listening to us because we know that we do make sense.
So how do we start breaking that down? Because this is a huge, as I said earlier, there are a number of different battles here. There are a number of different ways of tackling things.
I do think that it's about giving women courage. I think a lot of, especially in the social media era where everybody's very almost obsessed with being liked and getting likes on social media and having followers and it's they worry so much. So much of their personal identity relies on how much their peers like them. And I think that we just need to build up women's self-esteem to the point where they actually have the courage to have a different opinion that isn't the norm. To speak out about injustices that they see, even if they're the only person in the room doing it. I think that if we provide that support system for women, that will just happen naturally. If we just let women know that, you're not the only one, we're here, we can come together, we can support each other. Even just knowing you're not the only one is enough. That you end up having the courage to speak out in your own life.
That same is true for other women, and
yes, all ages, really.
All ages, yeah.
But I think young women, are more self-conscious and more worried about what their peers think about
I think
them.
Maybe your peer groups are more important to you when you're younger.
But why would you want to have a peer group of people? But why would you want to have a friend group of people that would hate you for your opinions? And for disagreeing with someone is one thing, and I have friends I disagree with. But if you had friends that would that would send you death threats, why would you want to be friends with those people? That was kind of what gave me the courage to speak out. It's like, if anybody disagrees with me, I don't want to be their friends at the end of the day, because I don't want to be friends with someone who thinks that children should be sterilised and that women shouldn't be allowed to have female-only spaces. Like, I don't want those people in my life.
They've got the friends that you talk of in this. They've kind of got blinkers on, though, haven't they? Because they're not seeing.
They think it's
the
just
whole
pronouns.
Picture. They think it's just pronouns.
It's just about kindness, and they're not seeing.
Just let people live.
Yeah.
So how do we get through to them that it's much more?
I think TikTok especially, when you go on these platforms, you just see a bunch of feminine presenting men who identify as trans, and they seem harmless, they seem nice, and that's not the full story of the transgender issue. As we discussed, women's only spaces, people unnecessarily going through surgery,
prisons as well,
prisons. There's so many, as you described before, there's so many layers of this issue, and I think because people see it as just pronouns, we need to expose that it is prisons. It is
much more to it.
It's much more, and it does cause danger to the individual and to society.
And do you think that that it's possible to think that we might reach a stage when large numbers of these young people suddenly say, well, you were right, I was wrong?
I do think that there is going to be a mass detransition probably in the next 5 years.
It's going to be awful, because I think so many people go through so much suffering, and
even the ones that do still continue to identify as trans, I think that they will sue the NHS for complications. Like phalloplasty, for example, is almost 100% complication rate. So even if they don't actually desist and go back to identifying as women, I still think that there will be a massive amount of lawsuits because of complications. And I think once people see their friends and how much they've suffered as a result, I think that will be an eye-opener. for a lot of young people.
It's sad we have to get to that point, though. I don't want people to go through this.
I do think that.
But I think because people just see it as pronouns, respecting people's identities, why do you care if someone goes into your toilets? Why, you're not going to look at them in the toilets, that kind of stuff. When they don't see the full picture to this, and I think that's why it's so important, because we don't want it to get to that point.
Of course, yeah. We that's what we're doing now. We're trying to speak out now before it gets to that stage. But I do think that. I still think that stage is, unfortunately, I do think that is coming, just from what I've seen in my own personal life, like that some people transition and it was a very sudden decision and they went on hormones very quickly and doubles mastectomy very quickly, and I do think that if I know a handful of people in my own life, there's probably thousands out there in the rest of the country.
Oh, sure there are.
Yeah. So I do think that's coming. I wish it didn't have to get to that stage.
Yeah.
I think in the meantime we should continue to speak out so it doesn't get worse. Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you another one, because young people look at the women like me and a lot of women that are in the Women's Rights Network and in this fight generally, and they think of dinosaurs and they're old and they don't know what they're talking about, and just let them be quiet, this kind of thing. It's also true that women of my generation look at young people and think they're all caught up in this ideology and this trend. And I live quite near an art school, and I often see groups of art students with blue hair and whatnot walking around. And whilst in previous years I wouldn't have thought anything of it, I'm immediately labelling them as part of this ideology. Not that I'm scared of them, but I would maybe hide my T-shirt or something. But so, what can we do to break down those barriers that are formed between the old and young? Because I'm quite sure all the young people I see aren't in this ideology.
I think that older women and just people in general just need to remember that not every young person is a trans activist. I would say the most young, like most people my age, some are very caught up in it. Most of them don't have an opinion.
Most just want to be respectful.
Yeah, they don't have an opinion. Their opinion on the issue goes as far as, I'll respect your pronouns. That's it. They don't actually, and you know what, they probably have seen the stuff that's going on with sports, and they probably have been like, well, maybe I don't agree with that. I've not met a single person in my life that does agree with the sports issue.
Well, it's like when I've done street interviews with uni students, and at first I asked them, do you think transgender women should compete in women's sports? Like, yeah, of course they should. And do you think transgender women should be included in women's only space? Yeah, of course. And when you dig deeper, do you not think there's biological differences? Do you not think that might pose harm to the safeguards of women's only spaces when you undermine the definition of gender? They start to rethink, especially women, because a lot of young girls don't see themselves in that position, and then when they actually have to think about it, when they actually have to get into that situation, they change their minds.
They just say what they're expected to say, and they haven't actually thought about it.
Yeah.
And when they think about it, they think of a very extreme example with someone who is like very passive and very and they don't look, and they don't think about 6 foot tall men that could just identify as women. And if you show them the likes of like Leah Thomas in sports and
Jessica
yeah, and you just say, this is what you're if you're opening the door to some, you're opening the door to them all at the end of the day. And I think a lot of the times they just say what they're expected to say, and I think that is just a symptom of being a young woman and trying to fit in and trying to be liked, and that you almost don't want to look at the other side and look at and hear what they're saying. Yeah. So I do think that if you push them a wee bit on these, I think you'll find that they maybe haven't actually developed their opinion as much as they think that they have.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, finally, we've got lots of women that are mums, as we talked about earlier.
Yep.
And lots of people with younger people in their lives that are maybe supporting this ideology. What would you say to them? How would they bite their tongues, don't say anything, or keep plugging away, or what do you think?
Do you mean like how do I change their mind?
Yeah, you know what would you advise the women like, me, any of the ones here that was a young person in their life that was being being sucked into this ideology?
I would recommend any parent to get their child off social media. Get your kid off TikTok.
Really?
Get them off TikTok, and I mean that. Get your kid off TikTok. I don't think anybody under the age of at least 16, I would go as far as 18, should be on TikTok, because I do think that parents don't know what their kids are watching on that, and you can't know because they consume so much media in such a short space of time. And I think that I do think that kids have picked this up and or have transitioned because they have joined TikTok. And I have seen that. I've seen and like 12-year-olds girls call themselves it on TikTok, and they develop a friend group online, and they are learning from adults, and they're led down this path because they were out playing with their friends during lockdown. So if you have a child who is starting to get caught up on this, take their iPad off them, take their phone off them, tell them not to don't let them get TikTok, don't let them have social media.
Do you think the same, Jess?
I don't think it's realistic for children to go off social media completely. I know this answer is easier said than done, but I think it's to get to the questions first. It's properly feminist to be like, a woman is an adult human female. It doesn't matter if you present more masculine or feminine, you are just you, and all that stuff. Get to these questions first, because I think a lot of this comes from young people having an identity crisis. I think it's them trying to find out who they are. And if you install that confidence in them, if you tell them this doesn't have to be your identity, and if you just make them aware of these situations first, then it's easier to explain it to them later when they come across these videos of trans ideology.
That's the issue, I think, with a lot of young people. That this is for a lot of kids, this is the first they're really hearing about the conversation about sex and gender. So they're learning about gender identities before they're actually learning about reproduction.
Right.
So they actually don't fully understand the biological differences between men and women. They don't even really understand where babies come from before they learn about gender identities. Whereas with us, we learned about reproduction, we learned about male and female, we learned where babies come from. These kids are learning it the opposite way around.
Right.
So they're learning what makes a man is how they feel, and what makes a woman is how they feel, before they're even learning about the reproductive system. So I actually think that people need to have these conversations with kids a lot younger. About what makes someone male and what makes someone female before they learn that male and female are gender identities, because they're learning them at very young ages now, even primary school, that they're just identities, that they're nothing more than a label that anybody can stick on themselves. So I do think that, as we were saying, they need to have this information first, so that when they counter these videos, they already have the counter argument in their head. So this isn't the first time they're being introduced to this conversation.
I also think we should try and let kids, I know this is quite a liberal answer, try and let kids express themselves. Because when I was younger, I had my glasses on, my scar, and I went to the making of Harry Potter, and I remember the guy going, "Oh, you look like a nice Hermione," and I was like, "I'm Harry Potter." But that's not because I wanted to be a guy, that was because I wanted to be Harry Potter. I identified with the character's traits, and I think that's good, I think that's okay. Similarly, I had boyfriends, as in male friends, and I think later on, and I think as well, if this ideology became more prevalent when I was much younger, I remember going up to them in year 7, started high school. Can I hang around with you guys? No, we want to talk about porn. And it's like, as a young girl, I don't want to talk about porn. And even if I did, they're like, no girls can't discuss porn. And it's like, I think when these differences are there, that's when girls want to feel included, and guys as well, because guys are transitioning as well. And that's when they see it as more important, and that's when they want to have these different gender identities.
I think that a part of the issue is gender roles being enforced on kids, and gender roles are enforced on kids far more than they're enforced on adults, because kids have less choice about what to wear. Kids, and people gender babies before they're even born. They have gender reveal parties where, oh, it's going to be a girl, let's have a whole pink party. I think that parents need to be less restrictive and more open to gender non-conforming behaviour in children, because if they don't, and the child is really adamant that they want to play with the toys that are typically associated with the opposite sex, you're going to have a child that identifies as the opposite sex, and you're going to have a child that wants to go on puberty block. I think we all have to be more open-minded, and I think we also have to take a bit of accountability that it's a product of the sexist society that we've seen this. Like I think everybody reinforces gendered stereotypes to some degree, and I think that we definitely should leave kids room, and I think we should do away with school uniforms. I think we should do away with like the idea that there's certain haircuts for each, like, because young girls now are thinking that if they want to cut their hair short, they have to identify as a boy. Why can't
where I thought we'd got to?
Yeah.
But it's regressive, and it's gone way back.
They're seeing this as like the only way to be themselves is that I have to identify as something else. And it's sad to see, because you know if it was as harmless as just calling themselves a man, like, have at it. But it's because it comes with the medicalisation and the sterilisation and it is at the end of the day the medicalisation of gender non-conforming people. It's saying to people that if you don't act the way that you are expected to act because of your sex, there's something wrong with you and we need to fix you. And I think that's just. It's really heartbreaking, really, to think about, that young kids are growing up and thinking, like, I can't play, a wee boy, I can't play with a Barbie. If I want to play with a Barbie, I have to call myself a girl. And I think we all, as a society, should just try and move past those stereotypes.
But coming into that is the idea that we can fix things, which I've noticed sort of coming up with younger generations, that there's a fix for everything if something goes wrong. Yeah. And there's not, and it's like being offended. I believe everybody needs to learn to be offended. It's not a problem. You don't die. You're just offended, and you don't speak to that person again. Possibly, it's okay to offend somebody, and it's okay to be offended. It's okay to have something wrong. There's not a fix for everything.
Yeah. And you can't expect like the whole world to cater to you at the end of the day. Yeah. You just got to. I think a lot of young people forget that.
Some people might say you have to grow up here, but maybe that's not appropriate in this discussion.
But yeah, I think going back to it, I do think that if everybody starts being a wee bit more open-minded about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, I think that is all of this is a product of sexism and the sex society that we live in. And I think if older women give us examples of women, all types of women, masculine women, feminine women, and they are role models for younger women, I think younger women will see, like, okay, I can be a woman and be masculine. I can be a woman and I don't have to put makeup on every day. I don't have to adhere to these sexist stereotypes. So I think that's why I really enjoy being part of this network, because I have met all types of women. They're all like from all sorts of background, and all, and I've just said, like, there's a million ways to be a woman.
Even old women can be fun.
A million ways. Yeah.
Yeah. They're lying.
Final question. How does the Women's Rights Network want to tackle these issues? What's their response to these issues, and especially towards young women?
Well, we need to get more young women in the network, because the change is going to come from young women. It's not women like me. I can't change it. I can try and influence it with people like in my own life, younger women in my own life. I can speak about it. Hopefully, one day I'll say something that somebody might pick on and think, "Oh, that's a good idea, or that's a good thought." But really, it's going to come from young people themselves, and as Shay said, encouraging them to be a bit braver, to step out a bit more. It really upsets me that in the network there are so many people that can't use their own names or the photographs. We have the group that's been meeting today. We can't take photographs because some people don't want their faces shown. That's really upsetting, and it's a diabolical place to be in the 21st century.
But I think it's good to let young women know that they can reach out anonymously. They can message us from the sock account on Twitter. They can join, and you'll get braver over time, and eventually you'll be completely fine with showing your face on camera, but it's good to let them know that
even if you don't, you can come join the network. You don't need to be on camera.
Don't worry, we won't let you. we won't expose you. There's plenty of people in our group chats that are completely anonymous, so we should let them know that they can, even if they just wanted to have a chat. I'm really open. My DMs are open. Come and have a chat with me. It doesn't matter if you're comfortable sharing your name. I'm open
really
for that.
It's about allowing young women to be braver.
Yeah.